Hello, today I will teach you how to get better at half sword. Half sword is a physics game, which means you have to keep in mind that when fighting with weapons, more speed equals more force, which equals more damage. When sprinting at an enemy, for example, your kick will do more damage if your timing is good. Kicking while standing still won't be as effective, because there's not enough momentum behind your kick. The same applies to weapons. When sprinting, you will do more damage with a swing compared to normal. Be warned that sprinting while attacking will do extra damage to you as well. Don't run into your opponent's weapon or you may face an instant knockout. Depending on where you land an attack on a weapon matters as well. For example, with the mace, a blunt weapon. If you strike with the middle end of it, it will do a lot more damage than if you strike with any part of the handle. Greatsword, when half-swording, will do blunt damage at the pommel of the weapon. It will do cutting damage at the blade. Depending on how armored your opponent is, you may want to strike with the pommel rather than the blade. There is some cheese to cutting damage, as there are many times where you can tap your opponent's skin, and the game will treat it as a full cut, at least in the current playtest. Using cutting, you can easily slice a throat with a simple tap if you're skilled enough to keep your arm near your opponent's throat. Cutting damage is also what makes the spiked spear the best weapon in this game too. It has a lot of spikes, and one tap to the face can end an opponent instantly. Running into a spiked spear is easy and can end you instantly. Be careful around them in the playtest. Swinging and aiming at half-sword is what makes a bad player bad and a good player good. By default, the camera is locked onto your opponent, making control of it limited. By going into the settings and moving the lock-on slider all the way down to the left, you effectively unlocked the camera and made it easy to move around when you aren't holding down any attack buttons. Though it may take a little bit of practice, by unlocking the camera you can rotate your character around at fast speeds, allowing you to maneuver your weapon fast. By letting go of the attack button after I flick my mouse to the left, I can move the weapon even faster by moving my mouse further to the left after releasing the attack button. If you also move after letting go of the attack button or even sprint with proper timing, you could potentially do extra damage with your attack, maybe even taking off a limb or splitting them in half entirely. You can even do combinations such as starting a swing, letting go of the attack button and moving the camera, then holding the attack button again to finish the swing or change the direction of your attack. Experiment with it for a few rounds. With time, it'll become easier. Defense is difficult in this game. It takes practice, and you will fail many times over as I have. Using the shield is the most obvious way to defend. However, you trade the attack power of a two-handed weapon and half-sword for the shield since you are one-handed your weapons. You cannot half-sword either with a shield in your other hand, making close combat knockouts more difficult. What you need to learn is parrying effectively, but also wrestling against your opponent's weapon. What I mean is the ability to be precise and spatially aware enough to hit your opponent's weapon out of the way by swinging. Start by practicing keeping your weapon centered in the heat of the moment. Keeping it in front of you can easily be achieved by holding the attack button and not swinging too far away from the center of your character. Move your weapon around your character enough to keep any incoming attacks away from your body. Imagine your weapon like a movable wall. You want to wall off the weapon's force so it doesn't hit you. This is a star where you'll find that it is difficult to move the weapon where you want it to go most of the time. In fact, oftentimes you cannot move your weapon far enough away to stop the incoming attack at all. There are two strategies to solve this problem. The first one's the easiest. When I was explaining offensive swinging by unlocking your camera, I showed you how you can gain more control over your character's body and be able to rotate and move faster. It can be utilized in a defensive style as well. Once you have a sense of rotation and don't need the camera locked to guide you, you can face your opponent's weapon. By facing your opponent's weapon, you can directly strike it to block it. Not only can you strike it, but you can manipulate and wrestle against it. Oftentimes in my YouTube shorts, you'll see me rotate my opponent's weapon in a half circle around their head and strike them. I accomplish this not out of luck, but because I'm intentionally striking at my opponent's weapon to keep it from hitting me. With practice, you can do quick and flashy maneuvers as well. It just takes a bit of persistence and training. The second strategy, which can also be combined with the first one, is circling your own weapon around to quickly strike your opponent's weapon out of the way. This is the most challenging method, and I use it as a quick reaction to the opponent's swinging rather than something to lean on. The timing of this must be perfect. If your opponent holds their swing back and you rotate your weapon, all you've done is left yourself open for the attack. This motion, if done reliably, must be done in a split second when you see your opponent's swing start. This circle motion can be done at the top left, top right, bottom left, and bottom right. When deflecting a thrust forward from something like a spear, instead practice knocking it to the side at the front, then wrestling it away with these circle motions. This will leave the spearman wide open, and it will turn into an easy weapon. There are other things you can do, such as half-swording to catch an overhead attack. However, this method is limited as you can only move your blade in certain directions while half-swording. Both defensive strategies are effective on their own, but combining both and working them together in unison makes for the greatest defense. To do this, remember that the objective is to catch your opponent's weapon before it reaches you. Start by keeping your opponent's weapon in view. If you need to, adjust the POV and the options so your character blocks less of the screen. You can either make it really close or really far depending on your preference. I enjoy facing multiple opponents at once, so I personally keep the POV far away as I can see attacks coming at both sides and behind me. Though I had to get used to this as the opponent's weapons are smaller, making it harder to position my weapon in the right spot. Do whatever makes you comfortable. Once you have your opponent's weapon, if they are holding it there, you can simply thrust at it. Or do a flurry of tiny short swings at it by spamming the attack button and moving the mouse slightly each time in its direction to capture and contain it. But if they are charging at you or you feel they aren't going to hold back, you can start your defense with a circular motion to attempt to catch their weapon. If they do end up holding the weapon back, then after your circle motion you can switch to the other strategy and attempt to capture the weapon and rotate the character around to move your weapon against theirs quicker. With practice, these are effective methods of parrying without needing to rely on a shield or half-sword. In every game and real life, there's a common rule strategy everyone follows. It is called spacing. Spacing is the practice of mastering a positioning of both yourself and your opponent. In order to dodge any attack or alternatively prevent someone from dodging an attack, you need to focus on spacing. Keep in mind the length of the opponent's weapon, the length of your own weapon, and envision a sphere of how far that weapon can reach before being swung. Those are what we'll call the danger zone. When any body part is in that zone, you risk it being hit. In gaming, there is what is also called a hitbox and a hurtbox. The hitbox is what connects to the hurtbox to calculate damage. Your hurtboxes are all of your body parts from head to toe. Your hitbox is your weapon. What you want to do when spacing is maneuver around and in and out of the danger zone. By holding shift or whatever you send that's the sprint button in the controls, you can hold on to a direction to maintain momentum in the half sword. This is risky because remember that moving or sprinting also sets you up to take double damage since this is a physics-based game. But by maintaining momentum you can bait the NPC's attack by simply moving close to their weapon reach when swinging, then moving away in a quick motion. You will find you can dodge their attacks with ease, then even potentially sprint towards them to close a gap between them and your weapon if you are wielding a shorter weapon. Alternatively, if you are being attacked by multiple opponents, you can simply use this to back off away from the oncoming assault. This is a skill that every combat situation utilizes. Even something as small as a verbal assault can get you away from danger in the real world. After all, people are only able to shout so loud before you can't hear them.
You're about a stupid
By acknowledging spacing and practicing it, you will become skilled in any game beyond just half sword. There's more to spacing in half sword, however. As explained before, every weapon does different damage based on where you land your strikes. A spear at its very tip will do cutting damage, but at its hilt it will barely do anything. Through consistent practice at spacing, you can position your character to strike exactly at the tip of a spear when you align your character's position at the right spot between your foe. By switching between half-swording a spear or any other weapon, you can also change the length and positioning of your weapon. By half-swording the spear, you bring the spear closer to your character, which allows you to strike with the tip of it a lot easier. You'll also notice it becomes easier to swing around. The same thing applies to a great sword, great axe, short swords, and anything else you can half-sword. By mastering rotations between half-swording and normal attacks, you can easily control the fight at both a distance and up close. Whether you enjoy closing the gap between the opponent or keeping at distance will define you as an aggressive or a defensive player. Ideally, you should practice both, as overly aggressive players can turn into glass cannons that get knocked out instantly opposed to a defensive player who is maintaining space. Or an overly defensive player who is too afraid to attack will ultimately get overwhelmed by an offensive player who will corner them at the back of the arena and end them. Both offense and defense are skill sets that you need to switch between to be the greatest version of yourself in a fight. Sometimes you may even get disarmed or injured in half-sword and find yourself fighting with only your fists. Or you may find yourself in a rough situation and simply half-swording may not be enough to fight around it. By pressing Q or E by default, you can both pick up weapons or grab onto your opponent. Q is the left hand, E is the right hand. When you are disarmed, you may be able to grapple onto your opponent's arm and stop them from being able to swing their weapon. You need to line up your character's hand so it goes in a forward motion towards the body part you want to grab onto. Once you've grappled onto your opponent, you can hold either the left or right mouse button, depending on which hand you are grappling with, to control your opponent's momentum. This can completely prevent them from swinging, while you can do multiple things such as run forward by holding sprint and kicking them to the ground. I've grappled onto opponents and kicked them to the ground, giving me enough time to grab my weapons and win the fight. After you do whatever you need to do with a grapple, you can let go of your opponent by pressing the button you used to grapple them. Ultimately, it is good for controlling your opponent when they are in your face, and nothing else will work. You can also pick up their limbs to taunt them. Armored opponents tend to be annoying in half-sword, as it leads to long drawn-out fights if you don't know what you're doing. Using everything we learned, we can identify weak points and openings with armor that will win us the fight. The most obvious point is the back of the head and the throat. Those are the most common openings on nearly every armor set in this game. Using half-swording on a greatsword, or by swinging our attack precisely by spam clicking to keep it up in the air where you want it to be, and rotating the camera, you can slice them in any opening you need with a bit of skill. However, when dealing with heavy armor, that tends not to be easy, as those points can be microscopic. Two-handing a blunt weapon such as a mace or warhammer and hitting the head tends to do enough damage to make the opponent drop to the ground. It will require full swings through holding down the attack button though. Once the opponent is floored, with a blunt weapon you can hit them over and over with a metal point of it in the head until they surrender. Or with a greatsword you can do a sawing motion while half-swording at their throat to force them to surrender. General attacks at their throat tend to force heavy armored foes to surrender in the current update of the game. When identifying a weak point in armor, besides just at the head, pay attention to what is metal and what is fabric. Fabric tends to represent a gambeson, meaning it's possible to thrust the weapon through it. This is usually found on the backside of the opponent. However, one of the most common openings in the current update is to the feet. If you notice your opponent is wearing brown shoes, or they're not metal, you can likely chop their foot off or slice into it. This will weaken your foe, slowing their swings down, and with enough strikes it could even force them to surrender. All in all, if you like the look of heavy armor, but don't really want to deal with it, you can change the damage both you and the NPCs take in the settings by moving a slider. I recommend keeping these sliders at the middle for the best experience though. Especially if you are doing something such as breaking world records in community competitions, as adjusting the damage you receive in those will be viewed as cheating. Just remember that practicing wisely will improve your skills. There are bad habits that players develop when they don't understand the game, so they tend to practice things that don't help them. This is bad practice, and by understanding the mechanics of the game you can evade bad practices that ultimately harm your performance. With this video I hope you will improve your gameplay and appreciate half-sword with much more integrity. Stay in the ring and enjoy fighting. Subscribe for daily half-sword shorts.